Hi, I'm Trevor Lund from Harvest Community Church and RevTrev.com, and in today's Pastor's Minute, I'm going to talk about 5 ways to celebrate the process after salvation. So this process that we're to celebrate, it begins well before salvation. And we talked about that a bit on Sunday, and I thought I should kind of expand more about what happens after salvation. And so I've come up with 5 ways that you can celebrate your entire life, like everything we go through. And I hope that this helps. So the first thing I should say, not the number one, the first thing is to cherish God's experiences, to ponder them, and to share them. Mary, it said in Luke that she pondered these things in her heart and cherished them in her heart. Paul prayed that we'd be active in sharing our faith. And in Revelation, it says the saints overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. The children of Israel, when they entered the promised land, they were told to set up remembrance stones. And these stones were often 12 stones representing the 12 tribes that they'd set up, like by the Jordan River and different places where God showed them something miraculous. And the reason was, when their children in future generations would see them, they'd ask their parents, what were those stones for? And the parents would actually tell the story of what took place, and it was to pass on from generation to generation to generation. Powerful things, these remembrance stones, and today we call them testimonies. And on Sunday we heard a wonderful testimony from Wanda and some of the experiences she had with God, like the same weekend. And it's good that we share our faith and we're active in share our experiences with God, because that's how we cherish those experiences. That's how they become real. That's how they become more than just an experience in our past, but they become an active part in our day-to-day life. It's through testimony. The second way to celebrate the process after salvation is be active in a life-giving church. We're told to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. It's others' testimonies that spur us on and to fan into flames the embers that might have grown cold. Now, there's an old story that, I don't know if it's true, but it's a great story about a young person who wants to enter the ministry, and he's really wondering how on earth can he stay fervent in his walk, and like Romans tells us to be, what's it say? Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. And how can I do this? Like how? And he went to an older gentleman who was kind of like a mentor, and he asked him, like, how do I keep that fervor going in my life? And the old man didn't say anything. There was a fireplace in the house, keeping the house warm. And as they sat by the fireplace, the old man took out a little ember of wood, and it was glowing red, and he put it on the rock next to it. And he just kind of looked at it as the ember went from bright red to black. And then the old man took the ember and put it back in the fire, and it glowed red again. And the young man knew what he was saying. And that's why you need to be in a life-giving church. It's other people's testimonies. It's, helping each other to kind of bounce off ideas and knock off the rough side of all of us. And really, if you're in a place that celebrates life, you're gonna be able to celebrate that process that goes on from salvation, before salvation, through baptism, through experiences with God, and on through eternity. 2 other tips here that kind of go together is you got to have grace for yourself and grace for others, but you also need to embrace truth for yourself and truth for others. So what do I mean by that? We're all going to need grace. And so have that grace. But Jesus came graceful of truth. And Paul tells us to speak the truth in love. And really, it's that balance. It's grace and truth. If it's just all about grace, God will forgive, God will forgive, God will forgive. Yeah, he forgives, but man, he forgives so that we can do better. And if it's all about do better, do better, do better, do right, do right, do right, and it's not like, okay, like God's gonna has grace for you in that process. We go the other way. And so it's a balance that we have to have grace and truth in all that we do. And that's the only way we can celebrate the process we're in. Because, you've experienced some of this process already. You may have milestones like salvation, like baptism, like experiences with God. You may have you will have experiences where there's been disappointment and loss and tragedy. And hopefully you've experienced that God brings good out of that. And the comfort that you receive going through that, you're able to share that comfort with others who are going through a similar thing. Enjoy this process, and don't understand God's at work, and he's going to finish the work he started in you. Now, the fifth thing that I want to give you is you need to commit yourself to spiritual growth. I think the number one hindrance for Christians everywhere, let's just say North America. The number one hindrance for Christians in North America is that we don't commit to growing spiritually. It's like we've got our fire insurance. We're not going to hell because we've said that prayer. But we don't commit to becoming more and more who God has called us to be. Look at how the Amplified Version transliterates expands what Paul says to the church in Philippi. It says, "For my determined purpose is that I might know him, that I might progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and more clearly, that I may in the same way come to know the power outflowing from his resurrection, which it exerts over believers, and that I may also share in his sufferings, as to be continually transformed in spirit into his likeness to his death, in the hope that if it's possible, I may attain the spiritual and moral resurrection that lifts me up out from among the dead, even while in the body." Okay, what is Paul saying? Well, maybe it makes more sense in the NIV. It says, I want to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his suffering, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow to obtain the resurrection from the dead. He goes on to say, "Not that I've obtained all this or been made perfect, but I press on to take hold of which Christ Jesus has taken hold of me." If at some point you disagree, that too God will make clear to you. Only let us live up to what we've already attained. You and I are in a continual process. It started well before salvation, and it's going to continue on well into eternity. In the meantime, let's learn to celebrate that process and celebrate what God is doing. The good work he started in us, he is going to complete. And so, understand that God's at work in you, and he's going to make things work out for your good, for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And his plans are bigger and longer than even this life. So trust him in that. I hope that helps, and I hope that encourages you, because it was really meant to. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.